this is now the second time, Marla, where we've had a Democratic nominee who is a woman who is not able to get over the top against a man who a lot of Democrats feel has been sexist in his comments, who has been convicted of defaming a woman, E. Jean Carroll, and there's a lot of folks that are feeling the emotional scars from that.
And we were wondering if the way that Kamala Harris ran her campaign versus how Hillary Clinton did would make any difference. And what I mean by that is Hillary Clinton really hung her hat on the gender card. She was very much elect me as the first female president. Yeah. Kamala Harris did not by any stretch use that same campaign method in her campaign in the last 90 days. And we see the outcome here, because that's the other thing to remember, is that we did not expect to see such a quick turnaround in terms of who would be elected the president of the United States. We thought that blue wall, Michigan, Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, would take a lot longer. The polls certainly underestimated the power of Donald Trump. That's the other thing that we'll talk about, is the power of polls. Where do we go from here in terms of polling? Because they said it was going to be neck and neck, but it has really been much more in favor of Donald Trump. The national vote at this point still shows Trump tremendously ahead of Harris. And if, in fact, he does secure the national popular vote, then he would be the first Republican to do that in 20 years. The last one was George W. Bush, pardon me, in 2004, 20 years ago. So a lot to unpack when it comes to the future of the presidential election. Yeah.
And the last time before that the Republican won the primary was his father in 1988. So they basically, this would be the third time in more than 30 years that the Republicans have actually won the popular vote. Christine.
So we are awaiting Kamala Harris. She's going to approach the podium there. We're expecting that to happen at 1 p.m. It's going to be a big moment. We think of her being the California senator, our attorney general. For us here in California, there's a significance that is very personal, that hits close to home. You have interviewed Kamala Harris and Doug Emhoff, and I think that the significance of a Californian being that presidential nominee resonates with our state in a whole different way.
And she was the first Democrat to ever be the presidential nominee, and she did not win in that scenario. We've got some expert analysis that we want to bring into the conversation right now.
Go ahead.
Ange-Marie is joining us now live. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. Talk about this moment, Kamala Harris, and how you're processing this.
Well, there's certainly a lot to process, Alex, and thank you all for having me. I think one of the things that we haven't talked as much about is a little bit of the Ginger Rogers dance that Kamala Harris had to do in these last 3.5 months, right? Kind of doing everything backwards and in heels, in the sense of, really trying to get a campaign up and running and to run it as strongly as she could in those 3.5 months. And so I do wonder, even with this even if you were to call this a successful campaign in the sense of someone could do that in 100 days or less, just what else could have been done to really thwart the ascendancy of Donald Trump to the presidency again. And I'm not sure if there is an answer, although there will be lots of postmortem about this.
She's about to give this speech to the nation. We did not hear from her last night. What do you think the nation needs to hear?
I think the nation needs to hear a couple of things. Certainly, this will be very much a standard concession speech, in the sense of there will be lots of thanks to supporters and to other, groups, including family members and close staff. But I think the nation really does need to both see this concession speech in itself, the content of it, as what needs to come back to being normal in U.S. politics. And then I think the other piece is she will really want to talk about how her pledge to accept the results of the election, she's going to carry that out. And again, there'll be lots on her side who are disappointed by that. But we have to understand that we do live in a democracy, and elections do matter.
What do you think the message needs to be specifically to the Democratic Party moving forward?
Well, I think one of the things that the Harris campaign really tried to do is to actually say that there was a new generation of leadership, and I do think that that kind of mantra, if you will, does need to be effectively communicated to the Democratic Party. So in other words, what happened in 2024 with the whole, wanting someone wanting to run, but they really weren't necessarily the right candidate to run, and then deciding at the last minute to drop out and endorse, all of that cannot happen again in the Democratic Party. And so the new generation of leadership needs to be allowed to emerge so that they can, fight another day on their terms rather than try and come in and clean up on the back end.
This was a resounding defeat for the Democratic Party and for Kamala Harris, losing every single swing state, underperforming Biden in almost every single county in the country. What went wrong? And in terms of messaging, how does the party rehabilitate itself from this?
Well, I think one of the challenges in terms of just seeing that there was lots of underperformance of Biden, but also there were in some micro categories, right, some pretty significant gender gaps in terms of the swings of support. And so I think there are two things that the Democratic Party, but I think our country more generally really needs to think about. And that is truly whether it is ready for a woman president. And if we are not ready for a woman president, what does that really mean in this country? Certainly, we can talk about the campaign performance within a 100-day span, but I think we also need to think about what does it say that two of the most qualified candidates for president have run in the past 8 years, and both of them have been defeated despite their qualifications. And so I do think that there's a lot of soul searching that needs to happen across the country. And if it's not the case that we're not willing to kind of truly consider and vote for a woman president, we need to think about what that means for our country.
Conservative analysts this morning watching the coverage, they were saying it's not just about electing a woman or not. It was about a lot of the issues that are affecting Americans. So where do you think the Trump campaign got it right, that they got so much turnout?
I think there were two things, of course, that were kind of blowing in the Trump campaign's direction that were positive. First and foremost, there was the idea, of course, of the economy. And so being able to run, given the spikes in inflation that happened in 2022, and, voters really remembering 2018 and 2019 and kind of having 2020 kind of drop out of their minds. It was almost like a trauma that happened that they blocked out of their minds. And then coming back to 2021 and 2022 and making judgments about candidates on that front. So that was the first issue that they had that really, pulled voters in their direction. I think the other one that folks might be a little bit more surprised by is the strength of the Latino support for Trump, specifically not just on the issue of the economy, but some of the split support for Trump on some of his more drastic immigration proposals. I think there's often a thought that the Latino vote is a monolith. Many scholars, colleagues of mine, have debunked that myth, but it still holds. That Latinos are only interested in talking about the economy and the immigration, but only specifically talking about immigration as pro-immigration. And I think Trump was really able to peel off a lot of Latino voters who are concerned about those issues.
Let me get your thoughts on, I know this is all Monday morning quarterbacking, but that's what happens the day after an election. Her pick for Vice President, Tim Walz. We know that Pennsylvania was so key to winning the White House when she had the governor of Pennsylvania, Josh Shapiro, as a top pick. She went ahead and chose the Minnesota governor, of course, Tim Walz. Do you think that that played into this at all?
Well, we know traditionally that vice presidential picks can only hurt and don't often help. I don't think Walz hurt the campaign. I think there was a challenge with regard to Pennsylvania in particular. Shapiro would have worked very well potentially in Pennsylvania, but there was some concern about him being able to translate some of that to other swing states. And so if there had been a Shapiro, would the election have been she won one one swing state out of, the 7 that were swing states, that would mean that, former President Trump still would have won the election. So again, I think, you're right that it's Monday morning quarterbacking, but I think, Walz did not have a negative impact on the campaign that cost Harris the election.
As we're all kind of debating what happened and the results, we are reminded that it is a divided nation where you have great cheering last night we saw in our coverage at the Trump campaign. The Harris campaign, their party folded early. People were sent home saying that she was not going to speak last night, would speak today. I'm thinking of individual households where you might have somebody in one camp and somebody in another. How as a nation do you see us coming together? Because I find it hard to believe that any one president can be for everybody on every issue.
I think that is a reality in a lot of households. I know there was a little bit of attention in the last couple of weeks of the campaign cycle talking about secret women Harris supporters, wanting to hide their votes from their husbands or their partners. I don't know that that was huge in terms of actual electoral impact, quite obviously. But I do think that there really does need to be a cultural transformation in our country that returns back to civility. And when we think about those kinds of returns back to civility, hopefully it can start in these households, right, where people can gather together at Thanksgiving in the next couple of weeks and have conversations that are not going to devolve into, so-called unfriending on Facebook or blocking, cell phone numbers, because I think we do really need to understand each other.
That's easier said than done. Ange-Marie Hancock, professor at The Ohio State University. Thanks so much for sharing your perspective. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
All right, we continue to look live at this picture from Howard University in Washington, D.C., the alma mater of Kamala Harris. She was hoping this would be the scene of a historic triumph for her as a potential first woman president, first black Asian woman president. That is not going to be happening. It instead is going to be the site of a concession speech. She does have a nice crowd that has gathered there that is waiting for her. She was expected to start speaking around 1 o'clock, running a little behind that. We haven't been given an exact time on when this could start, but it could start at any moment now. We expect to hear from her. Not sure if we'll hear from anybody else, if we'll hear from Tim Walz, her husband, Doug Emhoff, or it'll just be the vice president who is speaking. It's unclear, Marla, where Kamala Harris goes from here. Some folks calling me last night suggesting maybe she runs for California governor, which is an open position. Others wondering whether she would run for president again in 4 years. Not necessarily a clear or obvious path. She will remain as the vice president of the United States for the next couple months, but then who knows?
Yeah, Inauguration Day is, in fact, January the 20th, when she says that she will make sure that President-elect Donald Trump will have a peaceful transfer of power. You make a great point, Alex. I interviewed Kamala Harris when she was elected the first female district attorney in San Francisco many years ago. From then, she has had a rise throughout the state of California, of course, and now to the White House. So what is next for her? That's interesting that you bring up potentially running for California governor. We know that Gavin Newsom is termed out in 2026. We're hearing the crowd in Howard University get excited. Seems like they know something that we don't.
There's
There is Tim Walz.
And his wife, Gwen, who was the pick for VP. Based off of him walking out into the crowd, doesn't necessarily look like he's going to be speaking, but he is there to support her. On some of these events, like concession, we do hear the VP candidate speak. Some of them we don't. We see Ella Emhoff there in the front row, the stepdaughter. Her mother right there is there as well, who is very close with both Doug Emhoff and Kamala Harris. We see Cole Emhoff there, Doug Emhoff's son. And we see hugs around for the family. That's Tony West and Maya Harris, Kamala Harris's sister. Her niece is there as well. This is the people that are closest to Kamala Harris, who have been there, Marla, for all of these election nights. She's won over and over again and hasn't been without a job for decades.
Vice President
Let's
of
listen.
the United States, Kamala Harris.
Good afternoon, everyone. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Good afternoon. Thank you all. Thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you. So let me say, and I love you back, and I love you back. So let me say, my heart is full today. My heart is full today, full of gratitude for the trust you have placed in me, full of love for our country, and full of resolve. The outcome of this election is not what we wanted, not what we fought for, not what we voted for, but hear me when I say, the light of America's promise will always burn bright. As long as we never give up, and as long as we keep fighting. To my beloved Doug and our family, I love you so very much. To President Biden and Dr. Biden, thank you for your faith and support. To Governor Walz and the Walz family, I know your service to our nation will continue. And to my extraordinary team, to the volunteers who gave so much of themselves, to the poll workers and the local election officials, I thank you all. Look, I am so proud of the race we ran, and the way we ran it, over the 107 days of this campaign. We have been intentional about building community and building coalitions, bringing people together from every walk of life and background, united by love of country with enthusiasm and joy in our fight for America's future. And we did it with the knowledge that we all have so much more in common than what separates us. Now, I know folks are feeling and experiencing a range of emotions right now. I get it. But we must accept the results of this election. Earlier today, I spoke with President-elect Trump and congratulated him on his victory. I also told him that we will help him and his team with their transition, and that we will engage in a peaceful transfer of power. A fundamental principle of American democracy is that when we lose an election, we accept the results. That principle, as much as any other, distinguishes democracy from monarchy or tyranny. And anyone who seeks the public trust must honor it. At the same time, in our nation, we owe loyalty not to a president or a party, but to the Constitution of the United States. And loyalty to our conscience and to our God. My allegiance to all three is why I am here to say, while I concede this election, I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. The fight for freedom, for opportunity, for fairness, and the dignity of all people, a fight for the ideals at the heart of our nation, the ideals that reflect America at our best. That is a fight I will never give up. I will never give up the fight for a future where Americans can pursue their dreams, ambitions, and aspirations, where the women of America have the freedom to make decisions about their own body and not have their government telling them what to do. We will never give up the fight to protect our schools and our streets from gun violence. And America, we will never give up the fight for our democracy, for the rule of law, for equal justice, and for the sacred idea that every one of us, no matter who we are or where we start out, has certain fundamental rights and freedoms that must be respected and upheld. And we will continue to wage this fight in the voting booth, in the courts, and in the public square. And we will also wage it in quieter ways, in how we live our lives, by treating one another with kindness and respect, by looking in the face of a stranger and seeing a neighbor, by always using our strength to lift people up, to fight for the dignity that all people deserve. The fight for our freedom will take hard work, but like I always say, we like hard work. Hard work is good work. Hard work can be joyful work. And the fight for our country is always worth it. It is always worth it. To the young people who are watching, it is... I love you. To the young people who are watching, it is okay to feel sad and disappointed, but please know it's going to be okay. On the campaign, I would often say, when we fight, we win. But here's the thing. Sometimes the fight takes a while. That doesn't mean we won't win. That doesn't mean we won't win. The important thing is don't ever give up. Don't ever give up. Don't ever stop trying to make the world a better place. You have power. You have power. And don't you ever listen when anyone tells you something is impossible because it has never been done before. You have the capacity to do extraordinary good in the world. And so to everyone who is watching, do not despair. This is not a time to throw up our hands. This is a time to roll up our sleeves. This is a time to organize, to mobilize, and to stay engaged for the sake of freedom and justice and the future that we all know we can build together. Look, many of you know I started out as a prosecutor, and throughout my career, I saw people at some of the worst times in their lives. People who had suffered great harm and great pain, and yet found within themselves the strength and the courage and the resolve to take the stand, to take a stand, to fight for justice, to fight for themselves, to fight for others. So let their courage be our inspiration. Let their determination be our charge. And I'll close with this. There's an adage an historian once called a law of history, true of every society across the ages. The adage is, only when it is dark enough can you see the stars. I know many people feel like we are entering a dark time, but for the benefit of us all, I hope that is not the case. But here's the thing, America, if it is, let us fill the sky with the light of a brilliant, brilliant billion of stars. The light of optimism, of faith, of truth, and service. HU. And may that work guide us, even in the face of setbacks, toward the extraordinary promise of the United States of America. I thank you all. May God bless you, and may God bless the United States of America. I thank you all.
Kamala Harris speaking there. We now see her husband, the second gentleman of the United States, Doug Emhoff, joining her. On a human level, you got to imagine how deeply painful and difficult that must be. But Marla, a real hopeful note from Kamala Harris trying to lift up specifically young people.
Yeah, I mean, she made it a point to say, well, I concede this election. I do not concede the fight that fueled this campaign. Her message to the young people is, it is okay to fight, and even if you don't win, continue that fight. That was her broader message today. She spoke for just about 11 minutes. Her speech started at 1:25, wrapped up just a couple seconds ago.
What stood out to me, though, about that use of the word fight is that we heard that so much with Donald Trump during the campaign. We will fight, especially during that assassination attempt. We will fight. And so have her use that word repeatedly, almost seizing that word for the future there. She talked about the light of promise will always burn bright. Another thing, too, you mentioned all the people in the audience, her family, her loved ones there, her vice presidential pick in the audience, not on stage with her. That was her moment there at Howard University.
Yep, literally her as the only speaker coming up there solo. And so I don't know if we have any more live pictures from there, but just, you know, a moment for her and for the country, and now a giant question mark in terms of where the Democratic Party goes from here, where the country goes from here, and there are a lot of people on the Democratic side who are just feeling shocked, who did not see their country as being as conservative as it is, based off of the vote totals that are coming in so far. A resounding victory for Donald Trump.
Well, we do know the Republicans flipped the Senate. The House has yet to be determined. We're watching some very tight races here in California, Orange County, Riverside County as well. And those seem to be extremely tight. Still too early to call, and that could be another week or so before we get those.
And a brief programming note, we will talk about that tonight with Pete Aguilar, who's the chair of the House Democratic Caucus, at 6 o'clock tonight on the Fox 11 News. Also joining us at 6 in studio is Nathan Hochman, who is going to be the new district attorney for LA County. George Gascon calling him today to concede that race. Hochman will talk about his path forward tonight at 6 o'clock.
Speaking of conceding and making calls, Kamala Harris talked about the calls she made to former President Trump, incoming President Trump. She said, we must accept the results. She told that to the audience there, the crowd there, and she said, we will help him and his team with this transition, that we engage in peaceful transition of power. And that speech You could feel her emotion there at her alma mater where she went to school, Howard University. And you mentioned talking about the students, addressing the students at the very end. Almost felt like a graduation commencement speech where she was trying to uplift this younger generation as they move forward with their leadership.
And there are a lot of people that are in pain, a lot of people that feel despair and that don't feel a lot of hope right now. And I think she's aware of that and is trying to focus on that. And one of the things that was so interesting, Marla, in doing a lot of this reporting, especially the Democratic National Convention, was talking to a generation of black female leaders here in California who have been mentored by Kamala Harris for 20, 30 years, that she has always made a point to try to lift up the next generation, specifically the next generation of young black leaders. And there are many of them who are now statewide elected officials in this country, in this state, who consider Harris somebody is a really important mentor, and you saw some of that potential mentorship on stage tonight.
Well, you make me think of the iconic picture that went viral from the DNC in Chicago with, I believe it was her niece, who was watching her speech there when she formally accepted the nomination, with her head behind and looking up at her aunt there as she gave her historic speech in Chicago. So we're going to have much more of all of this tonight on the Fox 11 News at 5, 6, 10, and 11. But we also have, speaking of transitions, we also have some fires that we need to get to because they are turning out to be pretty dangerous. So the small box that you're seeing there on your screen right now, this is Sky Fox up and over the fire that's burning in Ventura